Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all our participants joining us today. Thank you for being here for this crucial session titled Rape Culture Uncovering the Root Causes. Today's session is brought to you by the Research and Development Department at Bachpan Save the Innocence. At BSDI, our core vision is to build a society that is deeply aware and actively vocal about child sexual abuse. We firmly believe that safety begins with education and systemic change. To achieve this, we actively conduct targeted awareness sessions across schools and colleges, alongside specialized training programs for school principals to foster safer institutional environment. As part of our continuous effort to dismantle the deep-rooted cultural narratives that enable harm, we are bringing you this specific session today. To guide us through this academic and social breakdown, I, Vedika, coordinator of R&D department, am honored to introduce our presenters for the evening, Rana, Inayat, and Harry. Moving on, before I hand over the mic to our speakers, we have two quick important requests for everyone. First, that we want this session to be an interactive space. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, please feel free to post them right in the chat box and we will address them. Second, I would request each one of you that you will see a QR code displayed on your screen right now. Please take a quick moment to scan it and complete the short pre-assessment form. The link has already been posted in the chat box as well. Now, why this is necessary? This pre-assessment is vital for our R&D team. It helps us gauge the room's current understanding of these concepts before we dive in. So, more importantly, it also allows us to measure the direct impact and effectiveness of our advocacy workshops so we can keep refining our educational outreach. Thank you for completing the pre-assessment form. Without further ado, let's begin with our first segment, that is the roots of normalization. Over to you, Inayat.
Good evening, everybody. Myself, Inayat. So, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this presentation will cover sensitive and potentially distressing content related to sexual violence and rape culture. Some of the topics we'll discuss may be triggering for survivors of sexual violence or anyone who has experienced harm related to gender based violence. If you feel uncomfortable at any point during this presentation, please feel free to step out, take a break. Thank you for being here and thank you for approaching this conversation with care and openness. Since our topic is rape culture today, let's dissect the word first and know what is rape. As we as we have all heard and seen in news in daily life about acts of sexual violence and physical abuse, rape is a specific act of sexual violence. It's when someone is sexually violated without their consent. It's a crime, an individual act of harm. Would you guys please share your views at what do you think rape culture is? How are the two different? How is rape and rape culture different? Please feel free to use the chat box. Yes, this is kind of right that culture around act of rape is committed. So I'll explain it like this, that rape culture is not about one act or one person. It's the broader social environment that normalizes, excuses, or even tolerates sexual violence. Yes, rape culture is a social environment in which sexual violence is normalized. When the things are said like using language that trivializes rape, that boys will be boys, girls shouldn't get raped, blaming survivors instead of perpetrators. It is so rape culture basically is a set of attitudes or beliefs that make rape more likely to happen and less likely to be condemned. So think of it this way, that rape is the individual act while rape culture is the atmosphere that allows that rape to happen repeatedly. So now we'll watch a video on rape culture.
Rape culture. It's a term that describes an environment where rape is pervasive,
normalized,
and accepted as inevitable.
Rape culture does not necessarily mean that society or individual people promote sexual violence in an outward, active manner.
Rather, rape culture is largely perpetuated via unexamined and false beliefs.
Some examples of rape culture include myths about sexual violence,
victim blaming,
language that trivializes rape,
jokes,
sexual objectification in ads,
images that glamorize sexual violence,
song lyrics that send confusing and harmful messages about consent, and much more.
Rape culture teaches people not to get raped.
We should be teaching people not to rape.
Rape culture normalizes sexual violence, and as a result, a victim survivor may not understand what happened to them as rape.
They may think they are overreacting
and decide not to talk to someone, get help, or report the violence.
Even if they do recognize what happened to be sexual violence, rape culture can cause them to blame themselves,
feel guilty and or ashamed, and feel afraid that they will not be believed,
including by professionals and authorities.
How can we challenge rape culture?
We can start by believing survivors.
We can also examine our own internalized beliefs and prejudices about gender roles, sexuality, and sexual violence.
We can think about and question sexist and otherwise oppressive messages we encounter in pop culture and media.
We can challenge others if we hear them repeating rape myths or making victim-blaming statements or rape jokes.
Everyone deserves to live safely.
We all have a role in ending sexual violence.
So I'm hoping that all of you have understood how rape culture is different from rape. If so, please give me a thumbs up so that we can proceed. So now moving on, pyramid of rape culture. So do you all have any idea what pyramid of rape culture is? Yes, Ravi?
I was trying to give the thumbs up. So, please continue.
I'm sorry, you're not audible clearly. Can you please repeat what you just said? Okay, so moving on, our topic is pyramid of rape culture. So anybody would like to share your views that what do you think pyramid of rape culture means here? Take a guess maybe. Okay, so I'll explain. The rape culture pyramid is a visual model that shows how everyday sexist attitudes and behaviors can support more serious sexual violence. It puts the less obvious, more socially accepted behaviors at the bottom and the most severe harms like rape at the top. So like as you can see, explicit violence that is at the top level. Now this is the pinnacle of the pyramid, the tip. The most visible one, but it is least common. This includes acts of sexual violence like rape, assault, physical abuse. Everybody can identify this, but we don't identify the causes that lead to it. So we'll be understanding that in the pyramid. So the bottom level, that is the base level, is a normalization. Now this is the largest part, but the most hidden part, where rape culture becomes just how things are, like saying boys will be boys when they agree teaching girls to avoid getting raped, assuming certain genders are meant to be dominated or to comply, rape jokes that we laugh at without thinking. So the key point here is that normalization at the bottom, it supports degradation, that supports removal of autonomy, and that further supports explicit violence. We can't stop violence at the top without changing what we accept at the bottom. Now, the third level, that is degradation, this is when people are insulted, like body shaming, harassment, sexual harassment, calling people degrading names based on gender. This leads to the second level, that is removal of autonomy, when someone's control is taken away over their own body. Examples can be controlling somebody's decisions in relationships, clothing, or behavior, pressurizing them, groping, sexual coercion, dosing, treating people as objects rather than individuals with agency. Now, these all levels that are below the top level, all these are the things that lead to explicit violence like rape and physical abuse, because these lead to the acts that we most readily recognize and condemn, but they are supported by everything below them that we just discussed. So, we'll be discussing in our presentation today about the roots of normalization, deconstructing victim blaming and bias, digital echo chambers in modern backlash, structural barriers and path to change. Now, I would like to hand over mic to my friend Harry.
Thank you, Inayat. Now, we're going to share the first part of our presentation, where we discuss the role of society as an aspect in rape culture. Social learning theory. How behaviors are normalized. We observe and absorb so much media content in today's day and age, and it gradually becomes a part of our thoughts, our learned behaviors. We see the portrayals of what's normal and what's not, which behaviors are normal and which aren't. And it also somewhere down the line governs the understanding and reactions of our peers and our family members in situations. Victim blaming. Now here I'm going to ask you all a question. Can anybody tell me what sort of things we hear when somebody offends, when we see some offender and somebody who's been offended, or in a simpler language, somebody who has been harmed or mistreated or catcalled or probably even raped? What are the general comments we come across towards the person who was harmed instead of the perpetrator? What kind of comments do we initially hear? Do you guys have an example? Yeah, like Yashwin said, that you should have been careful, or stuff like why was she out so late at night, or why was she wearing such a revealing outfit, or all of that. So now explain. You must have given them a sign, or you must have done something in order to attract that attention, stuff like that, like what Ridhima mentioned right now. Now, victim blaming is a long-standing narrative in rape culture, and we see it being due to how media portrays and directs the narrative and the negatives towards the victim and not the perpetrator. How we find the fault in the victim or whatever they were doing, which led to the act, versus not at the perpetrator. That is how it is built. I would also like to add that it certainly affects the victim how they don't see justice, and the offenders are not scrutinized even after a person takes the difficult step of fighting back while facing all the hurdles. It definitely takes away their courage. So that's now the biggest takeaway on this slide I would be giving is that consent education is the primary requirement in rape culture. Now I'm going to have you all focus on an activity that we're going to conduct. In this, I'm going to give you 3 lines that we're going to be seeing on the screen, which is we're going to identify which out of these is a learned myth and which out of these is a healthy boundary. We see there is one is boys will be boys. It was just a harmless cat call, and only a clear yes means consent. Which of these are learned myths according to us, and whatever the society perceives, and which is the healthy boundary amongst them? Can you all answer one of these? Yes, exactly right, Rhythm. Okay, moving ahead. Now, yes, exactly. Thanks, everybody. So, now for the first two phases, we identify them as learned myths because they excuse aggression, normalize sexism, and desensitize bystanders. And for the final phase, we identify it as a healthy boundary because consent must always be active and clearly communicated. Now, for the next slide, we've got socialization of masculinity, how upbringing leads manhood to silence. In this, we will address how the upbringing of men and loss of emotional understanding affects them. We have seen men around us to behave tough, behave emotionally stunted, and it is somehow framed as a sign of weakness if they don't behave like that. If they show emotion, if they become vulnerable, it is taken as a sign of weakness for men. It's not just how people around us normalize it, it is also the portrayal of men around us or the celebration of such behavior is done by the media, which tends to normalize aggressive, emotionally avoidant behavior. Now, with this regard, the change I would recommend here is that if we would to inculcate the healthy behavior of empathy, of being chivalrous, being kind, and being empathetic in younger children, in younger men, in younger boys, in school-going children, that would inculcate a healthier masculine environment and challenge the rape culture right at its head. For the next slide, we've got normalization of sexism and enabling of violence. It goes about the it goes about with normalizing sexist jokes, normalizing catcalling, and objectifying women publicly. We see these comedy shows and we all see these political members of the society that all add to casual sexist behavior. After a point, a person on the receiving end becomes numb and neutral to this and doesn't realize they are being okay with it, or at any point they're trying to just let that be equated to them. Would any of y'all give me an example of any casual sexist behavior as a person they would have come across or see around that, okay, somebody gave a sexist casual remark, something of that sort, if somebody crosses that with their mind? Anything that has been around, like you guys have gone through, or anybody who has heard some of that? We see that in schools, colleges, work colleagues, and workplaces. Anything, if you would have heard, could be normal, not so normal, but someone's dressing sense, yes. Like, why do they get to comment? She's a bad driver, exactly. That is a very, very stupid one. I'll give you an example. My mom is the one who's taught me how to drive. So I just as a random stupid thing I just had to mention, just because it's clearly stupidest thing to do, that you just kind of make a point out of a thing and then just try to scrutinize the gender on the basis of it. It doesn't work like that, and it shouldn't. That is what we're at. So the conclusion we would get out of this is that challenging sexism, raising voice against it, is the only way we can avoid violence and stand for our respect, identity, and place in the society. For the last slide for this part, we've got concept of male entitlement. Patriarchal systems passed down through generations condition men to view women's bodies as accessible by default. This isn't explicit, it's embedded in language, tradition, and social norms. They treat women's autonomy as secondary. From boardroom dramas to action films, men are consistently framed as the ones who lead, choose, and act. Meanwhile, women are shown as prizes to be won or figures who just exist to nurture others, stripping them of full personhood and reinforcing the idea that a woman's value is defined by what she gives to a man, not independently of whatever she is. Entitlement culture blurs the line between persuasion and coercion. A no becomes the opening of a negotiation rather than a clear boundary. We have long romanticized the man who doesn't give up, but when persistence ignores clearly stated wishes, it isn't romantic. It's pressure, and normalizing it's just going to cause harm. Change is possible when respect and equality are modeled consistently in homes, school, and media. They dismantle the assumption entitlement relies on. That's all for this part. I'm going to pass on the mic to Rana, and she's going to take over. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. And now we move to part two. So, as we all heard Harry speak about the normalization and how gender gaps and uh, a sort of discrimination between the genders and sexes exist. Now we move on to the part two, where we will actually be talking about what happens when such gaps exist, and some event like sexual abuse, an event of sexual abuse happens. What happens when that happens? How does society react to that, or how does society, how's what's society's response? So hence we will be talking about how the common reaction of finding fault in the victim works. Next. So, first, we will be talking about the just world hypothesis. So, the just world hypothesis is a concept which was given by a social psychologist when he observed that the mental health practitioners were very cold to the patients who were mentally ill, and he realized that they were holding a belief that the world was a just place, and if some bad thing happens to some person, or if the person is mentally ill, it's because of the person or what they earned by themselves, because the world is just. So here I would like to ask you, what do you think? You can share in the chat boxes that do you think that can bad things happen to good people? Yeah. So as I can say that most people say that yes, bad things can happen even to good people, because so there is something, isn't there something beyond what we ourselves earn? Maybe something beyond karma, maybe something that's beyond what I do and what I gain. So this is what we are going to reflect. Hence, yes. So, whenever an abuse or sexual abuse happens in the society, so whenever a sexual violence happens, what happens next is that people can feel scared, right? So, supposing the girl next door has experienced sexual assault, we would be scared, right? That if something could happen to her, it could happen to anyone, right? So we seek safety. And what happens next when we start seeking safety is we try to actually think about cause and effect. We start to think about karma. We start to think about how to predict a certain thing, a bad thing happening. And next, what happens is when we try to do this, we start to see the victim as guilty and deserving of whatever happened to them. She got abused, well, she must have deserved it. Yeah. And next, what this does is that it reduces compassion and it reduces empathy, and we start to distance ourselves from the victim. And what is the outcome of this? The consequence is that the responsibility to maintain justice is missed. When we make our hearts smaller, and hence we depend on karma and we depend on the world to just take care of itself, forgetting that we ourselves are part of the world. We ourselves are elements that keep this justice in place. So, this is the mechanism of how victim blaming works, and how the belief in a just world sometimes causes us to maintain the rape culture. Moving to the next slide. So now we'll be talking about to break the stereotypes. So for breaking the stereotypes, as Harry has already shared about how people, when a girl wearing short dress gets into an event of sexual abuse, we start to say that she was asking for it. So this is just that, and the reality is that it is the assault that happened to her was a conscious choice, a decision made by an intelligent person, an adult, a perpetrator who had a clear intention. And what happens is that when we say that she was asking for it, we let him go and we ignore the role that he had to play. Moving to the next myth. The next myth is about that she shouldn't have been there. This is, for example, when, as also Harry mentioned, that when someone was out late at night, or somebody was in a place which doesn't have a good reputation, like maybe a bar or some such place, or maybe even of a working woman, when she's just a simple working woman and something bad happens to her, some sexual assault, then we say that she shouldn't have been there. And and when we reflect on this to see the reality, it's that by doing this, we are making safety a conditional privilege, not a basic human right. That you have to be a certain way, you have to follow certain things to be deserving of safety and to be protected against assault. And hence, the next or the third myth is that we're going to reflect is she should have fought back. So sometimes when we hear a case of sexual assault, we always, our mind might go to the fact that she could have helped herself, she could have protected herself, she could have escaped. But when we reflect at the reality, we understand that when trauma, an incident of trauma happens, we freeze, and survival is our priority at that moment. We, our mind is stuck in a moment, and it's not possible to fight back when you are put under such a sudden, unexpected, tragic spot. So moving to the next slide. So now we will be talking about internalized misogyny. So I'll take a moment to ask if anybody knows what is internalized misogyny, or you can also guess. Yeah, something it's related to to the female. Exactly. Thanks for sharing. So, like, we in the word misogyny, we know that the word ogyny, the gyny is for females, and like the counterpart of this may be misandrogyny. So, we are talking specifically about misogyny here, about females. Mis means the hatred. So, this is about the hatred of females. So, misogyny was something that was seen, yes, negative societal stereotypes. Mhm. So misogyny was something that we saw in like males. Exactly, Ridhima. Yeah, thanks for sharing. That sums it up exactly. So I can see everybody knows what it is. Okay. So misogyny, as you all have shared, it's about the hatred towards women, but it was the male hating the females, maybe because of like power or control or such reasons. But what has happened? It has become internalized because over time, when we see the men hating ourselves, like females, the females also start to treat themselves the way men treat them, and they internalize this hatred towards themselves. So how this manifests, women can be seen as competing with each other, they can be seen as judging each other, they can be seen as doubting themselves, they can be seen as body shaming, which on the following, body shaming can lead to such distortions like people that are underweight or people that are overweight and obese, being stuck in cycles of poor dietary habits, and also women undervaluing themselves, being very good but not accepting or not being confident. So these are some manifestations of internalized misogyny. So next, why does this happen? It sounds like, why would a woman, why would a woman hate herself, or why would women hate on other women? So the answer is that it's social conditioning and a survival mechanism. So over the years, when these women who were submissive, who were kind of self-destructive, and who were kind of making themselves smaller, they were rewarded by the society and they were treated better, and hence it was something that was socially conditioned, and hence something that helped them survive and hence passed down to successive generations. And how is this relevant to rape culture? So, what happens is women start to police the victim's behavior in the case of a sexual assault instead of the violence that was done by the perpetrator. And so, what happens is that the perpetrator is going to get excused for whatever wrong they do. Next. So, and another way it's relevant is when we have labels like good girl and bad girl, and safety is something that is the privilege of a good girl and not a bad girl. So, if a good girl, like if a girl who is according to the stereotype ideal girl behaving and wearing certain ways, if something bad happens to them, we might see a little bit of sympathy. But if that same thing happens to somebody who doesn't dress well according to the standards, or who is not the norm, who is a little rebellious, then there is not that sympathy, not even that sympathy for her. So the step that we can do here after understanding a little bit about this is that we can identify whenever this happens, so that maybe it is an automatic response that you find in yourself or in your friend. You can stop to take a moment and try to unlearn these biases. So moving to the next, now we will be taking a look at what happens to marginalized groups. So we are talking about like people that are very few in number in our country. So like the Dalits, or maybe like the disabled people, or maybe the tribal societies, and these small groups. So what happens is that they actually have a greater risk of being assaulted, which for is for many reasons, and those include barriers. The first barrier is the language barrier, as they have a different language. If they are disabled, then they have a sign language because they can't speak or hear. Or if they are living in the tribal areas, then they have their very tribal languages is not very common. Then we have the legal barriers. Maybe there are not enough laws for them. And then we have the bias barrier. Bias because they are very different from us, so we don't know them much. They are, we don't relate with them that much, so we might be biased towards them. Then we have the access barriers, which means sometimes that they are located in certain geographical regions that are very unconnected with the main city, or like the uh, places where there are more uh, travel travel opportunities. And next, so what happens is that violence against them is seen as less severe or even expected, because we see them as less than human. And the perpetrator then exploits the victim's lack of this institutional support, and this lack of them being considered as human in the society. And so what we need to do here is that whenever we are a part of the system that impacts them, to find ways to support these marginalized communities to make up for their disadvantaged state. So moving to the next. So now we will be moving to the part three. So part three is we will be looking at the online misogyny, and mostly like the online world and the modern world, and how rape culture has found its way even into the online community and even in online or such interactions. And we'll be looking at victim shaming, LGBTQ plus erasure, reinforced exclusion, silencing survivors, and normalizing the violence. Next. So first, we will be talking about media cultivation theory. So as we know, media is where we learn to see the world and we learn how to understand the world. So what this theory, media cultivation theory, means is that media can cultivate worldviews, because whenever we see something on the media repeatedly, we start to see the world the way we are shown the world. Hence, how this is relevant to rape culture again is that when we see objectification in the media of women, then it desensitizes us to the woman's humanity. So, for example, if we see the women portrayed as objects in just in the media, it can also make us to do the same to the woman, maybe in our own circles. So next. So, aggression shown in the media repeatedly can make that aggression become actually acceptable, something that you accept. And next, repeated exposure makes it common. So, also just like Harish said about social learning, we learn from the society, and not just through first-hand experience, not just me learning what I see people around me doing, but I also learn from what I see on the media, what people do to each other, even on the screen. So we can learn from that. And when there is a repeated exposure of sexual violence and sexual abuse against women, we start to see that as common, and slowly first we accept it that it is okay, it's so common, I see it every day in the news. And then we move to expect it, that okay, this is probably going to happen just because it already keeps happening. So, hence, the step to take here is just mindfulness, not just for the creators of media who make the content in the media, but also for the audience. Whenever we see some things, then we need to reflect on, like, what if we see something that is so violent, for us to reflect, be mindful of what we saw, and to tell ourselves that it's not something common. And also, especially for children, as we can see in the picture, that this would impact mostly the children who see in the media, and they have less context also. So, just that. Now I would like to hand the mic back to Harry for, okay, before that. So this is like the picture which is showing what we just discussed, media cultivation. So we can see how this diverse, complex reality of different women with different context and background. The women are doctors, lawyers, athletes, they are artists, they are scientists, and how the mass media sometimes can show them into a certain uniform, narrow, and objectified kind of depiction where they are devalued, passive, sexualized, and shown as a stereotype. So this is what the how the worldview can be changed because of how media reflects on the screens for us. Okay, so now I pass the mic on to Harry.
Thank you, Rana. And now we're going to talk about social media backlash. Victim shaming blames survivors instead of perpetrators. When media or public commentary questions what a survivor wore or did, it shifts responsibility away from the person who committed the harm, just like we talked in Rana's presentation. Anonymity amplifies harassment and outrage online. Without accountability, people feel free to pile on survivors, making the internet a hostile space for those who speak out. Public scrutiny re traumatizes survivors publicly. Being dissected in comment sections or news cycles forces survivors to relive trauma on a public stage. Sensational coverage discourages reporting assault. When media treats cases as entertainment, potential survivors fear the same treatment and stay silent. On the next, we've got the incel subculture. Incel blames women for social isolation. The ideology deflects personal struggle onto women, creating a scapegoat rather than encouraging self realization or self reflection. Forums normalize resentment and misogyny. Repeated exposure to hateful narratives make extreme views feel ordinary and acceptable within the community. Entitlement towards women becomes common. Members begin to see relationship as something owed to them, dehumanizing women in the process. Online hostility escalates to real violence. Several high-profile attacks have been directly linked to incel ideology, proving online radicalization has deadly consequences. Digital literacy and mental health will help. LGBTQ plus erasure is our last topic for this slide. That includes queer individuals face unique sexual violence. LGBTQ plus people experience forms of violence tied specifically to their identity, including corrective assault and partner violence within same-sex relationships. Mainstream discussions ignore LGBTQ plus violence. Most public campaigns and media coverage center heterosexual experiences, making LGBTQ plus survivors invisible. LGBTQ plus survivors lack inclusive support like shelters, hotlines, and legal system, and are they're not often equipped or trained to support queer survivors appropriately. Now, my friend Inayat will continue the next part.
So now we're coming to the next part, part 4. Let's sit back and watch now. So first we'll be discussing about the consent education gaps. Now, why don't people understand consent? Let's talk about why this matters. In many schools, consent education is still limited, so a lot of students grew up with mixed or incomplete ideas. This creates confusion, especially when silence gets mistaken for agreement or pressure gets treated like consent. How many times have you people assumed something was okay just because no one said no? Please give me a thumbs up if you're relating with what I'm saying, because more times than often pressure is often confused with consent. Even not even It's not necessarily in romantic relationships, but even in platonic friendships. So consent should never be guessed. It has to be clear, informed, and voluntary every time. If someone feels pushed, cornered, or unsure, that is not real consent. Social media and peers also shape what people believe. So education is important for correcting myths before they become normal behavior, because silence is not consent. Many times we've seen in movies that one person is continuously pursuing the other person, which is sometimes not okay in real life. So that is not a great idea that we get from social media, movies, and online social content. Moving on to the next slide, the legal definitions of consent. So now we'll be learning about the passive consent and the affirmative consent. The affirmative consent model is what we should follow. Passive consent is assumed, whereas affirmative is clearly expressed. The lack of resistance means agreement in passive consent model, whereas in affirmative consent model, enthusiastic yes or clear yes is very important. So if someone says no, or if someone is completely silent, it comes under passive consent model, which we are not supposed to follow. In affirmative consent model, active agreement is always needed. There should always be an enthusiastic yes. If in doubt, ask, like always ask, is this okay? Unless and until the other person says yes, clearly yes, that means a no. This should be taught from a very young age, even in high schools. So, coming on to a next topic, marital rape. Does marriage equal consent? So, what do you all think? Do you have any views to share on this topic? Do you all think that marriage is a free, unlimited subscription to sex or any other form of sexual activity? Yes, right, Yashin. Marriage is not consent. Marriage is a commitment to care and respect, not a blanket permission slip. Consent is personal and changeable, regardless of relationship status. See, a spouse can refuse sexual activity at any time. Consent must be ongoing, voluntary, and informed. So, these are very important points which are supposed to be understood. Like, ongoing means not one at a time, it means like the person doesn't have to say that yes to the sexual activity in the beginning of the marriage, and that will imply for the whole course of the marriage. No, it is not that. It is just not like saying I do on the wedding day. It has to be freely given without pressure, fear, guilt, or obligation. Consent is always revocable. You can say no today even if you said yes yesterday. Survivors often face legal and social barriers. This is very commonly seen that, for example, if a person of sexual assault or a rape victim files a case in the court saying that this was marital rape, many a times it gets dismissed because it is very difficult to prove a case of marital rape. Even you are dismissed by your friends, your family members, your extended family, saying that, well, in marriage this is okay, when it is not. Marriage is not consent forever. And then coming on to our next slide, secondary victimization. So the for example, some sexual assault victim or a rape victim, that is primary victimization, that sexual assault has happened with somebody or physical abuse has happened with somebody. Now what is secondary victimization? It is when somebody files a case, for example, or all the things that the person has go to get justice, that is the final point. All the secondary things that they have to go through, the pressurization, the repeated questioning, now that is termed as secondary victimization. It means that the person has somehow become a victim for the second time. So, when systems cause more trauma, victim blaming increases shame and distress. For example, when people ask survivors, like, what were you wearing or why did you go there, like we discussed in the earlier slides by Harry and Rana, that these kind of questions, people always start blaming the victims. You might be late at night, or you might be wearing a short dress, or you might not be sober. This makes survivors feel like they caused the assault, creating deep shame and self doubt that worsens trauma. Repeated questioning forces trauma recollection. For example, they're asked dozens of times, like the police, medical staff, lawyers, investigators. Each time they must relive the trauma in detail, forcing them to mentally turn to that moment repeatedly. It can be damaging as the original assault. Now, delayed justice prolongs emotional suffering. When cases take years to resolve, survivors lie in constant uncertainty. The waiting itself becomes a torture. They can't move forward because the trauma is legally unresolved. Disbelief discourages reporting and seeking help when survivors aren't believed. Told many times they're told that maybe you're lying or maybe it wasn't that bad. So they end up feeling completely powerless. Disbelief mostly occurs in a family setting. For example, when a boy or a girl, a young boy or a girl is raped by someone from the extended family, they are most of the times they start thinking that even if I might say this to my mom and dad, they might not believe me. Or even sometimes when they do gather up the courage to tell somebody, they are faced with disbelief that, oh, this couldn't happen, or sometimes like this shouldn't go out as it will bring shame to the family. Insensitive responses, like we just discussed, undermine survivor recovery. The survivor recovery gets cold, dismissive, or sometimes judgmental responses from authorities or even doctors and family members are the first one. They make survivors feel isolated and worthless. Instead of healing, they face more pain, undermining their entire recovery process. So now let's do an activity. It's about bureaucracy and the leaky pipeline. So bureaucracy, it is the office system that keeps large organizations organized, but it can also feel slow or overly rule heavy. So for example, there is a rape victim. What do you all think is the first place that a sexual assault victim will go to when somebody decides to report? Where do you think is the first place that they will go to?
Police station.
Yes, right, police station. So would you all like to give me an example that what do you think that they'll face in the police station? That will Okay, so let me first explain about the leaky pipeline thing as well. So what we'll be discussing here is that, for example, imagine a pipeline. At one end of the pipeline is the victim, and at the other end is the justice that is given to the victim. So the thing is, we'll be talking about the leaky pipeline metaphorically. For example, all the things that the victim will go through towards till the time he reaches till the end of the pipeline, the all the holes in the pipeline that will lead to keep on draining out. The victims will keep on draining out of it one by one. The problems they will keep on facing, that will lead to kind of dismissal of the victim. So as we were discussing in the police station, for example, a police officer will say that, oh, I can't file the FIR today. The senior officer is at a VIP event. Come back tomorrow with a male relative. So this all can happen at the police station. The dismissal at the very first level, this will lead to a leaky pipeline. Maybe somebody gathers courage to, yes, indirect mocking, judgment, not believing in the victim, rape jokes. Yeah, all of this. So even if somebody maybe gathers the courage to go to the police station, the police might dismiss him or her, saying that, oh, you don't have this, come back tomorrow with this, or come back tomorrow with a male relative. So what do you all think? So okay, so the FIR has been filed. Where do you think the person will go to next, or where will the police take them or accompany them before going to the court?
Hospital?
Yes, hospital. So now even the hospital might dismiss the rape victims or sexual assault victims, saying that anything like, we are out of forensic kits. You must wait in the general ward for 6 hours. Also, they might say like, did you shower? If so, the evidence is gone. All of these things, they re-traumatize the victim again and again. So they might go to the forensic lab next, even like where they might say that the chain of custody form has a typo, we cannot accept this sample, go back to the hospital for a restamp. All of these are the things that lead to a leaky pipeline. And then the final of all is the court. Would you like to give an example that what happens in the court that might lead to a leaky pipeline metaphorically? Yes, already pending cases might be a hindrance. Defense lawyers and their behaviors. Yes, the repeated questions that defense lawyers ask, the victim starts feeling like he's the person who committed the assault. The repeated questioning, yes, the case gets delayed for months. For example, sometimes the police witness doesn't show up, sometimes the defense lawyer doesn't show up. All of these things happen and they keep on uh, referring the case further and further, which is not the case and which shouldn't be. So we'll have a discussion now that is red tape just an administrative hurdle or is it a systemic way to exhaust the survivor? So let me explain to you all what red tape is. So red tape means the unnecessary official rules, paperwork or procedures that slow things down. It's often used to describe bureaucracy that makes it harder to get something done. Like we just discussed about the leaky pipeline thing, all the unofficial rules, the paperworks. Sometimes it is necessary as well. But what do you think? Is it just an administrative hurdle or is it just a way to exhaust the survivor? What do you all think? Well, yes, it is a way to exhaust the survivors these days because what happens is that, let me just explain it, that red tape is not just an administrative hurdle these days. In many cases, it becomes, yes, it's a social construct. It becomes a systemic barrier that drains survivors. Red tape. Okay, Muskan. Red tape is unnecessary official rules or paperwork or procedures that slow things down. In our case, red tape means that any or the everything that we discussed about the leaky pipeline, for example, in the forensic lab, they say that get this paper stamped again, or in the courts, like they keep on delaying the case before coming to a decision. So all the unnecessary official rules or paperwork or procedures that slow things down, starting from the police station and then in hospitals and then in the forensic and then in the courts. That is red tape here. It is used to describe bureaucracy that makes it harder to get something done. In our case, the victim getting the justice. So what happens is that it becomes a systemic barrier that drains survivors emotionally, financially, and mentally. When a person has to repeat their story again and again, collect difficult paperwork, wait through delays, and face confusing procedures, the process itself can feel exhausting enough to discourage them from continuing. So, this is where the idea of leaky pipeline connects. At each step, some survivors drop out, not because their case is unimportant, but because the system makes it too hard to keep going. Delays, stigma, and institutional pressure can slowly push survivors away from reporting or pursuing justice, like we just discussed. So, yes, red tape can look administrative only on the surface, but in reality, it can function as a way to wear survivors down. This is why reform is not only about making forms simpler, it is about making the entire process survivor centered, respectful, and accessible. So, talking about change, justice for rape survivors. So, there is a shift from IPC to BNS, that is the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. The, so let me just brief you all by telling you that IPC was drafted by the British for colonial governance, but the BNS indigenizes criminal law, aligning it with contemporary Indian constitutional values and social realities. The shift is basically aimed to create a more robust, victim centric, and a fair legal system while addressing contemporary challenges like cybercrime and financial frauds. However, gaps like marital rape criminalization remain under debate. So basically, it is for protection of women is centralized in this, and there is obviously a need for broader social change still. But in the BNS, again, the consent remains central to defining sexual offences as it was in IPC, but there is a stronger emphasis on victim protection and faster justice. The change that we have seen is that earlier the cases in the courts used to take years to solve, but according to a new system that is the BNS, it claims on providing faster justice, which is true for some cases that we have seen. Whereas the marital rape exception remains unchanged. It is very difficult to prove that a case of marital rape has occurred. So, comprehensive sexuality education, consent is taught, not assumed. So, this is very vital. What comprehensive sexuality education covers is sexual health, relationships, gender, rights, safety, critical thinking, all of the things like STI, sexually transmitted infections, contraception, pregnancy prevention, to all of the things like consent on the other hand, where a yes means yes and no means no. When the children start becoming aware that this is okay and then this is not okay, it is very important for preventing rape culture because it teaches young people to give and recognize genuine consent, treat others with dignity and respect from an early age. It also helps inculcate healthier relationships among peers, even if it is platonic friendships or romantic relationships. It leads to prevention of sexual violence because children, they understand the power and control are not healthy in relationships. That pressure is not confused, it is not to be confused with consent. So all of this, it helps challenge harmful gender norms and stereotypes that, oh, girls shouldn't do this, boys should do this, or girls should avoid getting raped, like we discussed in the earlier slides. So now we come to our next topic, survivor led advocacy. Now, survivor led advocacy means putting survivors of sexual violence at the center of movements for change. For example, we discussed about the leaky pipeline, where red tape was an administrative hurdle these days, which is not to be done. When survivors, all of this needs to be survivor centric. When survivors raise their voice, when they speak publicly, they shatter the myths that enable rape culture. They expose how jokes and stereotypes, the things that are considered harmless attitudes, they connect to real violence. The pyramid of rape culture, if you remember, that we discussed in the beginning, all of us, we understood that things like normalization, degradation, all of these things that are the major part in our society, but they are least seen by the people. All these things lead to the explicit violence case, that is rape, sexual assault, which is the pinnacle of the pyramid, which is seen the most, but which is recognized most by the people, but it is actually caused by all the normalization attitudes that we have these days. Girls shouldn't wear such kind of clothing or shouldn't go out in the night, or if somebody reports a case, that were they even sober, how do we trust them, things like that. Advocacy, if let's assume that the all the thing has become survivor centric, it will expose systemic injustice, because back in the 70s or back in the 60s, when these things used to be less survivor centric, we used to normalize saying such things. Even educating girls was not normal. Educating people about what is consent, what is sexual violence was not common. But these days, when survivors are becoming more centric, they're raising their voices, we are know what systemic injustices are, how systems fail, how police dismiss cases to courts, how hospitals treat them poorly sometimes. And then communities are rejecting victim blaming attitudes these days. For example, in our generation, we can see that we don't usually, we do hear stereotypes, but we don't make them as, oh, that this was the case, that this happened. We don't completely blame it on the girl, but as 30 years back or maybe 20 years back, this used to be the case. Policy reforms strengthen survivor report. As more number of survivors are coming up and telling their stories, the policies are changing. Like we just saw that from IPC to BNS, it has indigenized according to what is needed. They have tried to bring the red tape down in some sort of way. We're not completely there, but we are still trying. When policies are improving, as policies are improving, more survivors feel safe reporting violence. Even an example of survivor-led advocacy can be seen in our organization Bachpan. Most of the volunteers are survivors of child sexual abuse. Also, we have a dedicated department Hope to support and empower the survivors to advocate change for the better. So now I would like to hand over the mic to Rana.
Thank you, Nayat. So now we're going to watch a small video about bystander intervention. So before we move into this video, I want you to share what you understand by bystander intervention or just by bystander. So who is a bystander? You can type in the chat box. Yes, thank you for sharing, Yashin and Kirti. So, I think you have an idea that a bystander is someone who is standing by during the exact moment when. Yes, thank you for sharing, Ravi. So somebody not there, but not directly connected, but a second person who is just a witness, sort of. So exactly. So you all know what a bystander is. So as we know that any of us could be a bystander. So what do we do if we actually see uh, the rape culture in action? Can we do some things to intervene? So here we will see 5 Ds of intervention. So we'll see the videos. These will be 5 ways how we can actually help in such a case as a bystander. Yeah, so now we move to the conclusion. As we come to the end of our presentation, let us take a moment to make some conclusions from what we have watched so far. And let us come to think about the actions that we can take to bring the change that we are all talking about. So, the first thing is to recognize the continuum of harm. For example, up till now, because of what we know so far, we may have thought of harm when we talk about the rape culture as being just the thing that is at the top of the pyramid that Inayat talked about. That is the actual assault, the rape, or the murder. But that's not the case. This kind of abuse or this kind of sexual assault actually is not just one big event, but various small, and then bigger events. So, hence, we need to recognize the continuum of harm, the smallest thing that is the part of the rape culture. So, I think today we could actually think about like or see what these small things are, like the jokes, the catcalling, the eve teasing, all of that. Next, second is transforming the bystanders into upstanders. So, in the video we just saw, all of those bystanders were able to become upstanders or people that became actively linked, or Ravi had said indirectly, but they become directly linked to that incident by taking some steps to help the victim. So, that is how we or anybody could become an upstander when if we happen to be present in such a situation. Next, we can see that what we can also do is seeing to the institutionalizing of affirmative boundaries. So, as Inayat had talked about passive consent and affirmative consent, we know that consent is of two types. One, which is just silence, which is assumed as a yes, and the other, which is a clear, loud yes. So, now when we understand these two types of consent, now the next step is to making this something which is official, something that is recognized, accepted, and the norm. Next is the cultivating a vocal and aware generation. So this would imply for the little ones, the children, and it is our turn now whenever we talk them, or whenever we interact with them, or whenever we see any occasion come up naturally, what we can do is we can make these little ones aware, and we can be vocal about these things instead of being silent and making it a taboo topic. So now we come to the end of our session, and I would like to hand the mic over to Vedika.
Thank you so much, Rana, Inayat, and Harry. Now, as we just a second. Now, as we come to the end of our session, as we conclude today's session, we leave you with one final thought that rape culture is not a permanent fixture of our society. It is a socially learned construct. And because it is learned, it means we possess the collective power to unlearn it. So every time you refuse to laugh at a sexist joke, every time you reinforce an affirmative boundary, and every time you choose to speak up instead of staying silent, you are actively rewriting the script. So thank you everyone for your time, your engagement, and your commitment to building a safer, more vocal world. We will now open the floor to any questions you have posted in the chat box. If there are any questions, I would request you to either post it in the chat box, or you can even unmute yourself and ask the question.